Scary telling.
I woke up late again, feeling groggy and disoriented. As I made my way out of bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was almost as if I was being watched. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts, and made my way over to the window to let in some light. The view outside my cottage was peaceful as usual, with rolling grassy hills stretching out into the distance. But something about the scenery didn't feel quite right. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. As I made my way down the stairs, the feeling grew stronger. It was as if the air itself was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I tried to ignore it, but it only seemed to intensify. I began to notice strange occurrences around my cottage, such as objects moving on their own and strange noises at night. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but as the days went on, the occurrences grew more frequent and intense. One night, as I was doing the dishes, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. When I turned to look, there was nothing there. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just out of sight. I tried to distract myself by watching TV and reading books, but the feeling persisted. It was as if there was a weight on my shoulders, pressing down on me and never letting up. I began to avoid going outside at night, and even during the day, I felt like I was being followed. The feeling of being watched never left me, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. It was as if I was living in a constant state of fear, never able to let my guard down. I didn't know what was causing it, but I knew that it was slowly driving me insane. As the days went on, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. I began to have terrifying nightmares and visions of something sinister lurking around me. In my dreams, I would see the ghostly figure of a woman, her face twisted in pain and sorrow. And when I would wake up, I would still feel her presence lingering around me. At first, I tried to ignore the visions, telling myself that they were just my imagination running wild. But the nightmares grew more intense and frequent until I couldn't tell the difference between reality and my dreams. I began to see the ghostly figure of the woman around my cottage, her eyes following me as I moved around. I would hear her whispering my name in the dead of night, her voice echoing through the halls of my cottage. The visions and nightmares became more intense, causing me to struggle to separate reality from the horror that surrounded me. I became convinced that the ghost of a murder victim was haunting me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching my every move. The ghostly figure of the victim became more and more vivid, her presence consuming my every thought. I would see her standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes pleading with me to help her. And when I would wake up, I would be covered in a cold sweat, my heart racing with fear. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, that I was just going through a rough patch. But the visions and nightmares grew worse, until I could no longer deny the truth. Something was haunting me, and it was driving me to the brink of insanity. I began to research the history of my cottage, hoping to find some answers. And what I found only confirmed my fears. The cottage was built on the site of a gruesome murder, and the victim was a young woman who was brutally murdered by her husband in the cottage. I became obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the haunting, spending hours poring over old documents and news articles. The more I learned, the more I realized that the ghost of the victim was still trapped in my cottage, unable to move on to the afterlife. The visions and nightmares continued, growing more intense with each passing day. I felt like I was being stalked and followed, my every move watched by the ghostly figure of the victim. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape her haunting presence. As the haunting visions and nightmares continued, I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The ghostly presence of the murder victim was growing stronger, and I felt like I was being suffocated by her haunting presence. I tried to seek help from a paranormal investigator, hoping to get rid of the ghostly presence once and for all. But they were unable to find any evidence of a haunting, leaving me feeling even more alone and helpless. The ghostly presence continued to grow stronger, and I began to feel like I was being watched at all times. I would see the ghostly figure of the victim around every corner, her eyes pleading with me for help. I began to feel like I was losing my mind, unable to escape the ghostly presence that surrounded me. The visions and nightmares grew more intense until I could no longer differentiate between reality and my dreams. I tried to confront the ghostly presence, but every time I tried to communicate with her, she would disappear, leaving me feeling even more lost and alone. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up from the horror that surrounded me. The ghostly presence became more and more vivid until I could no longer ignore her haunting presence. I felt like I was being consumed by her presence, unable to escape the horror that surrounded me. I tried to leave the cottage, hoping that a change of scenery would help me escape the haunting. But no matter where I went, the ghostly presence followed me, leaving me feeling like there was no escape. I began to feel like the ghostly presence was trying to communicate with me, to tell me something important. But every time I tried to listen, the visions and nightmares would grow more intense, leaving me feeling even more lost and alone. As the haunting continued, I began to feel like I was living in a constant state of fear, unable to escape the horror that surrounded me. I knew that I needed to confront the ghostly presence once and for all, but I was too afraid to do so. I began to feel like I was losing my mind, unable to escape the haunting that surrounded me. And as the days turned into weeks, I began to fear that I would never be able to escape the ghostly presence that consumed my every thought. I knew that I couldn't keep running from the ghostly presence that haunted me. I had to confront her once and for all, to find out what she wanted and why she was haunting me. So, one night, I gathered up all of my courage and sat down at the kitchen table, determined to face the ghostly presence that had consumed my life. As I sat there in the dark, I felt a chill run down my spine, and I knew that the ghostly presence was there with me. But this time, instead of running away, I stayed put, ready to face my fears. At first, there was silence, but then I heard a faint whisper, a voice that I recognized as belonging to the victim of the murder that had taken place in the cottage all those years ago. The ghostly presence told me her story, of how she had been brutally murdered by her husband and left to die in the cottage. She told me how she had been searching for someone to help her, someone to bring her murderer to justice, and how she had chosen me as her vessel. I listened to her story in shock and horror, feeling like I was living in a nightmare. But as the ghostly presence spoke, I began to feel a sense of purpose, the drive to help her find the justice that she deserved. We worked together, the ghostly presence and I, to uncover the truth behind the murder that had taken place in the cottage so many years ago. And as we worked together, I felt the ghostly presence growing weaker, her haunting presence fading away. Finally, after weeks of investigating and searching for the truth, we uncovered the evidence that we needed to bring the murderer to justice. And as we stood in the cottage, watching as the murderer was taken away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of closure, like a weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. The ghostly presence had been put to rest, her spirit finally able to find peace. And as I looked around the cottage, I felt like I was seeing it for the first time, free from the haunting that had consumed it for so long. I knew that the memories of the murder would always be there, haunting the cottage and those who lived there. But now, there was a sense of closure, a sense of justice that had been lacking for so many years. As I left the cottage for the final time, I felt like I was leaving a part of myself behind. But I also knew that I had found a sense of purpose, a sense of closure that would stay with me for the rest of my life. As I walked away from the cottage, I felt a sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The haunting presence that had consumed my life for so long was finally gone, and I could move on with my life. But as I walked down the street, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. The cottage had become a part of me, a part of my identity, and leaving it behind felt like leaving a part of myself behind. I knew that I had to find a way to move on, to start fresh and build a new life for myself. And so, I decided to take a trip, to travel and see the world, to find new experiences and new memories to replace the ones that haunted me. For months, I traveled across the globe, seeing new sights and experiencing new cultures. And with each passing day, the haunting presence that had consumed my life grew weaker until it was nothing more than a distant memory. As I stood on a beach in Bali, watching the sun set over the ocean, I knew that I had finally found the closure that I had been searching for. The haunting presence of the cottage was gone, replaced by the memories of my travels, the people I had met, and the experiences that had shaped me into the person that I had become. And as I sat down on the sand, watching the waves crash against the shore, I realized that the cottage had taught me something important. It had taught me that even in the face of darkness, there is always hope, always a way to find closure and move on. I knew that the memories of the haunting would always be with me, a part of my past that I could never forget. But I also knew that I had the strength and resilience to face any challenge that came my way, to find closure and move on, no matter how difficult the journey might be. As I stood up, brushing the sand off my clothes, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, like a warm embrace. The haunting presence of the cottage was gone, replaced by the memories of my travels and the new experiences that lay ahead. And as I walked away from the beach, ready to start the next chapter of my life, I knew that I would always carry the lessons of the cottage with me, a reminder of the strength and resilience that lies within us all.